The morning of August 2nd, 2025 began like any other in Ouagadougou. The dry winds of the Sahel whispered through the dusty streets, market stalls were opening, and children walked to school. But then, out of nowhere, the sky thundered. A roar deeper than any helicopter, louder than the old French aircraft people had grown used to. Heads tilted upward, hearts skipped a beat, and there it was, a JF-17 Thunder fighter jet slicing across the Burkina Faso sky. Not part of a parade. Not a borrowed plane on display for diplomats. This was different. The jet delivered from Pakistan carried with it no NATO permission slip, no Western conditions, no contracts hidden in fine print. Just steel wings and symbolism. Only 22 seconds of shaky footage filmed through a chain-link fence were enough to ignite debates in Brussels, whispers in Washington, and a firestorm of pride across Africa. Within hours, hashtags spread, memes were born, and the story leapt from Ouagadougou's airstrip to smartphones in Nairobi, Lagos, and even Atlanta. But here is the real question: was this just the arrival of a single aircraft, or the beginning of a defense realignment powerful enough to shatter the West's monopoly over Africa's skies? Could one blurry clip spark a movement that changes how an entire continent imagines itself? This is not just about a machine of war, it is about possibility, about whether Africa can rise on its own wings without waiting for approval from former colonial capitals. Stay with us as we unpack this story, 22 seconds that could alter decades of dependency. And before we dive in, let me ask you, do you believe that President Ibrahim Traoré's bold choices are building a real foundation for African sovereignty, or are we only chasing shadows? Please share if you feel Africa deserves to decide its alliances without asking permission. Subscribe if you believe that the truth, whether in steel or in spirit, matters more than the headlines. It all began not with an official announcement, but with a shaky 22-second clip. The frame was uneven, the sound muffled, and the perspective limited by the jagged wires of a chain-link fence at Ouagadougou's military airstrip. Yet in the center of the shot, gleaming under the Sahel's early light, was a machine unlike anything most Burkinab citizens had ever seen on their soil, a JF-17 Thunder fighter jet. Its nose angled slightly downward, ground crews, pushing it toward a secure hangar. On its tail, still visible, the unmistakable green crescent of the Pakistan Air Force. And faintly in the background, a whisper from the man filming, "They gave it to him." That single sentence, captured almost by accident, lit the match. By 11:47 a.m., the clip had already crossed 3 continents. On WhatsApp groups in Accra, young activists shared it with the caption, "Burkina rises." In Bamako, Telegram channels reposted it with cryptic emojis, wings, flames, and clenched fists. TikTok creators in Nairobi slowed the video down, overlaying it with President Ibrahim Traoré's most defiant speeches about sovereignty and dignity. On X, formerly Twitter, the footage appeared on timelines from Johannesburg to Istanbul, even reaching parts of Washington, D.C. Within hours, the numbers were staggering. More than 18 million views in less than half a day. Youth influencers in Kinshasa and Lusaka recorded reaction videos filled with disbelief and pride. Political satirists in Lagos mocked Western silence with skits titled, "Nothing to See Here." Even respected journalists from Al Jazeera and TRT reposted the footage with one tantalizing tagline, "Unconfirmed but undeniable." For the wider African public, official confirmation was irrelevant. The symbolism was already crystal clear. A next-generation fighter jet, not from Paris, not from Washington, but from Pakistan, was now parked on Burkinab soil. In an era where African leaders too often received second-hand equipment with long strings attached, this was a rupture in the story. It looked like a moment where Africa was no longer begging for approval, but acting on its own terms. By late afternoon, hashtags had exploded across the African digital sphere. Nana Traoré takes flight. Kian JF-17 for Africa. And the most poetic of them all, Shar chasing the jet. Memes flooded Instagram portraying Traoré in a desert cape standing proudly beside the fighter jet with captions like, "If they bring war, we bring wings." The cultural response was immediate. In Lusaka, a poet posted verses likening the aircraft to the voice of Thomas Sankara flying again over the Sahel. In Dar es Salaam University, students held an impromptu livestream breaking down the JF-17's technical specifications while quoting Africa's independence leaders. In Ouagadougou itself, crowds gathered outside cafes and market stalls, replaying the clip again and again. Some erupted into spontaneous cheers, while others stood silently, eyes locked on the tiny phone screens as if trying to memorize every angle of the jet. This was more than fascination with a machine. It was an awakening of imagination. For decades, Burkina Faso had been underestimated, its military power dismissed as insignificant compared to Western-backed regimes. Now, even if only for a moment, the country was imagined as standing shoulder to shoulder with nations capable of defending their skies. And yet, beyond the euphoria, questions quickly arose. Analysts noted that Burkina Faso's air force had no supersonic fleet, no pilots trained for fourth-generation fighters, and no infrastructure designed for such an advanced aircraft. But none of that slowed the wildfire. In the age of instant media perception, outruns verification. For millions across Africa, the clip had already done its work. As one Burkinab blogger wrote that evening, even if it was CGI, it reminded us that we deserve more than hand-me-downs and apologies. That sentence captured the heartbeat of August 2nd. The truth of the jet, whether operational or staged, mattered far less than the feeling it evoked: dignity, capability, and choice. Thus, the 22-second video did what decades of press releases, summits, and policy papers had failed to do. It pierced through cynicism and gave Africans something new to imagine: skies that belonged not to foreign powers, but to themselves. By the evening of August 2nd, the JF-17 was no longer just a clip. It had become a storm. What began as a grainy video shot through a fence had transformed into the beating heart of a continental conversation. From Ouagadougou street corners to Johannesburg's radio waves, the jet was not only seen, it was felt. In the capital of Burkina Faso, young men and women crowded outside cafes, eyes fixed on glowing phone screens. Some erupted in spontaneous applause, chanting Traoré's name as if the jet were his personal triumph. Others simply stood frozen, their faces lit by the shaky footage, staring with the intensity of those who realize they are watching history bend. It didn't matter that no government official had confirmed the delivery. To the people, the sight of that fighter jet was confirmation enough Africa was capable of more than scraps. Across the continent, art and culture gave the moment wings. In Bamako, street musicians improvised songs about the wings of Traoré. In Lusaka, graffiti artists painted the silhouette of a JF-17 across walls with the phrase, "No more permission slips." In Dar es Salaam, students hosted a live panel that mixed technical breakdowns of radar systems with quotes from Thomas Sankara. And in Dakar, coffee shop debates turned into late-night arguments about whether this signaled a turning point in African defense. Online, the reaction was explosive. Memes multiplied, weaving history and humor. One viral design showed the JF-17 half in sunlight, half in shadow, paired with the quote often attributed to Sankara, "You cannot carry out fundamental change without a certain amount of madness." Another split-screen meme contrasted colonial troops of the 1880s with the jet in Ouagadougou, captioned, "Then they brought chains. Now we bring wings." The emotional climax reached a fever pitch when hashtags like Janak Traoré takes flight and Nada JF-17 for Africa began trending not only across Africa, but also in Karachi, Ankara, and even Beijing. TikTok edits in Nairobi set the jet's arrival to Traoré's own voice, declaring, "We will never kneel again." Political cartoons in Lagos showed Western diplomats staring nervously at a small African plane morphing into a mighty eagle blotting out the sun. For African youth especially, this was not about hardware, it was about hope. The jet represented agency, the right to decide alliances without colonial oversight. As one Ghanaian MP tweeted, "The youth see hope where analysts see hardware. That should tell us something." But the eruption of pride and symbolism did not go unanswered. Defense experts were quick to pour cold water on the flames. Nigerian analysts reminded viewers that a JF-17 is not a pickup truck. It is a system requiring trained pilots, radar networks, and maintenance facilities. French commentators scoffed, "Symbolic, yes. Operational, absolutely not." Western defense blogs combed through the footage frame by frame, pointing out missing registration numbers and logistical gaps. Yet every skeptical comment only seemed to fuel the fire further. The more experts dismissed the possibility, the more ordinary Africans embraced it. Skepticism, instead of slowing the story, gave it sharper edges. It became a defiance not just of military weakness, but of the constant doubt placed on Africa's ability to dream big. The most powerful proof of this was in how quickly the image of the jet jumped from digital screens into physical life. Street vendors in Ouagadougou sold T-shirts with the fighter's silhouette over the Burkinab flag. In refugee camps along Burkina Faso's northern border, aid workers overheard children shouting thunder during their games. Across the diaspora, African-American activists in Atlanta reposted the clip alongside calls for deeper ties with the continent, while Caribbean radio hosts discussed whether this moment represented the stirring of a global South awakening. This was the peak. The jet, real or not, had taken flight in the hearts of millions. It was no longer about whether Burkina Faso had the capacity to field such a weapon. It was about whether Africa could reclaim its skies, its dignity, and its future without kneeling for permission. The climax of August 2nd was not the roar of engines over Ouagadougou. It was the roar of a continent that for a moment believed it could fly. The morning after the viral storm, Burkina Faso itself began to feel the ripple effects of those 22 seconds. What had started as a shaky video was no longer just an online sensation. It was reshaping how citizens saw themselves, how leaders framed their authority, and how the region calculated its alliances. In Ouagadougou's bustling markets, vendors added a new item to their stalls: T-shirts emblazoned with the silhouette of the JF-17 soaring over the red, green, and gold flag. Teenagers wore them proudly, snapping photos to share online with captions like "Burkina rises." Graffiti artists in working-class neighborhoods painted murals of the fighter jet accompanied by bold slogans, "No more permission slips," and "Wings of sovereignty." Even in classrooms, debate clubs shifted their weekly topics to ask, can Africa defend itself without Western approval? Yet the impact went far beyond symbolism. In villages along the northern frontiers where families lived under the constant threat of insurgent attacks, the video sparked something more: fragile expectation. Some residents began to believe that new air power was already in place to protect them. One aid worker reported children in a refugee camp shouting "Thunder, thunder" as they played, convinced that jets now guarded the skies above. This surge of hope was powerful but dangerous. As a humanitarian official in Soum province warned, hope can lift people, but false hope can break them twice. Inside government circles, the Traoré administration walked a careful line. On one hand, the viral jet served their narrative perfectly. Burkina Faso was charting its own course, building alliances with the global South no longer tethered to Paris or Washington. On the other hand, the absence of verifiable evidence meant they risked diplomatic fallout if the story was mishandled. 48 hours later, the government issued a deliberately ambiguous statement. It praised the strengthening of defense relations with partners of the global South and affirmed Burkina Faso's right to defend its skies and its sovereignty. Noticeably absent, however, were the words Pakistan JF-17 or transfer agreement. The silence was strategic. Regionally, the alliance of Sahel states Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger moved quickly to capitalize on the moment. Malian officials referenced winds of change in public speeches, carefully tying the jet's symbolism to a broader narrative of Sahel unity against foreign interference. Nigerian commentators framed it as proof that Africa could choose new paths of defense cooperation. Whether or not the jet existed in operational form mattered less than the shared sense of momentum it inspired across the AES bloc. But the same momentum also introduced new tensions with Western powers. In Paris, editorials mocked the credibility of the footage, dismissing it as dangerous myth-making. In Washington, policy analysts debated whether viral narratives like this could undermine U.S. security arrangements in the Sahel. One American think tank warned that even false perceptions of capability can embolden governments to reject aid packages or renegotiate from a stronger position. For everyday Burkinab citizens, however, the meaning of August 2nd was deeply personal. After years of instability and dependency, the idea that their country might command the skies, even symbolically, was transformative. A young university student put it plainly, "We have always been told to wait. This clip tells us we don't have to." Thus, the political consequence was twofold. Domestically, the video bolstered Traoré's legitimacy, aligning his leadership with pride and sovereignty. Regionally, it strengthened IS solidarity, offering a common symbol to rally around. Internationally, it unsettled Western capitals, exposing how quickly narrative power could shift the balance of perception. In just 2 days, the blurry footage had become more than a rumor. It was a political tool, one that could inspire unity, but also risk disappointment if hope outpaced reality. And in the fragile terrain of the Sahel, that balance between inspiration and expectation carried enormous weight. In Washington, the viral jet was never treated as a trivial meme. Within hours, analysts at the Pentagon and research fellows at the Center for Strategic and International Studies were circulating internal memos. Their conclusion was stark: this was a perception event with potential strategic impact. Translation: whether or not Burkina Faso truly possessed a JF-17 mattered less than the belief that it might. And belief, they warned, could shift the dynamics of power in the Sahel. For decades, U.S. leverage in West Africa has rested on a simple bargain: security assistance in exchange for influence. But if African publics begin to see new partners, Pakistan, China, Russia, as capable of delivering modern military assets without political strings, that bargain weakens. American analysts worried aloud that governments emboldened by such perceptions might reject U.S. aid packages, negotiate tougher terms, or rally public opinion against Western involvement. One policy paper even raised the uncomfortable question: in the age of TikTok diplomacy, can Washington's talking points on stability and democracy keep pace with the raw power of viral imagery? Across the Atlantic, France reacted with a mix of irritation and unease. French defense commentators openly lamented what they called a new optics war. For Paris, the sight, real or imagined, of a high-tech fighter jet from non-Western partners landing in Ouagadougou was a symbolic humiliation. France had been expelled from Burkina Faso under Traoré's leadership, and now even the illusion of advanced hardware underscored its declining influence. A retired French general went further, warning on radio: even if the jet is only for show, it shows too much. Meanwhile, in Asia, the narrative took on a celebratory tone. In Pakistan, media outlets framed the viral moment as evidence of strategic outreach to the global south, whether or not an official transfer had occurred. Chinese commentators highlighted it as proof that Western monopoly over African procurement was crumbling. And in Moscow, pro-Kremlin analysts suggested the jet symbolized a deepening of non-Western security blocs across the Sahel. But the reaction that truly stood out came from the broader global south. In Latin America, alternative media outlets praised the clip as a crack in the global hierarchy, a reminder that symbolic defiance could be just as powerful as weapons. Southeast Asian bloggers drew parallels to their own struggles against colonial dominance, noting how one video could resonate across oceans. Even within the African diaspora, the symbolism spread quickly. African-American activists in Atlanta reposted the footage alongside calls for stronger ties with African nations. Caribbean radio hosts debated whether the thunder of the Sahel marked the beginning of a broader awakening among the oppressed of the world. For Western powers, the takeaway was sobering. Control of physical battlefields is no longer enough. Narrative power, fast, unpredictable, and immune to traditional diplomacy, has become its own theater of conflict. A single 22-second clip, unverified and ambiguous, had managed to unsettle defense ministries, inspire art and pride, and fuel conversations in parliaments. For Africans, the message was even clearer. Sovereignty today is not just about owning machines of war, it is about owning the stories told about them. And on August 2nd, whether the JF-17 flew in reality or only in imagination, it reminded the world that Africa's skies no longer belonged exclusively to others. By dawn on August 3rd, the JF-17 was no longer confined to the runway of Ouagadougou. It had taken off into conversations across Africa and beyond markets, classrooms, refugee camps, and political chambers. A 22-second video, blurred and unverified, had managed to do what years of official statements could not: inject a new vocabulary of sovereignty into everyday life. Words like wings, thunderflight, and freedom echoed through digital channels, carrying with them the sense that Africa no longer needed permission to dream of power. But with inspiration comes risk. In the villages of northern Burkina Faso, where insurgents still stalk the night, some families whispered that new jets would finally guard their skies. For them, hope was real and it was urgent. Yet analysts cautioned if such expectations prove unfounded, disappointment could quickly sour into mistrust. Narrative victories, while powerful, must be handled carefully. When symbols promise protection that reality cannot yet deliver, they can fracture the very trust they were meant to build. Still, the significance of August 2nd cannot be dismissed as illusion. It revealed something deeper. The contest for global power today is not fought only with steel and fuel, but with stories and symbols. The West may still control vast arsenals, but in the realm of perception, Africa has shown it can compete. A single clip filmed through a fence reshaped debates from Washington to Bamako, from Paris to Karachi. That alone is a reminder of the shifting balance of influence in the 21st century. So the question lingers, will this moment remain a fleeting digital storm, or will it be the opening chapter of a new era where African nations command not only their own skies, but their own narratives? Will symbols like the JF-17 eventually be matched by fleets training and real capacity, or will they remain sparks that fade without fuel? For President Ibrahim Traoré and for all Africans watching, the choice is not just about jets. It is about whether sovereignty is defined by foreign capitals or by the people themselves. And for you watching from afar, whether in America, Europe, or across the diaspora, this is not just Burkina Faso's story. It is a test of whether dignity and independence can still be built in an age of surveillance dependency and doubt. Please share if you feel that Africa's right to defend itself should never depend on permission from abroad. Subscribe if you believe that the truth, whether it soars in steel or lives in spirit, matters more than the headlines. Because in the end, August the 2nd was never only about a jet. It was about possibility, and possibility once imagined is very hard to ground.